death sentence, and I think it's total hypocrisy for anyone to the United States to tell anywhere in the world to not execute, since we are, we have capital punishment and we're killing people all over the world. And there's pressure from within Afghanistan for the religious community there who is following Sharia law as they interpret it. That's my understanding of the article I read. So if there was people from would there be any influence that could go to people in those in power in Afghanistan to interpret Sharia law? Would there be any other place that could come and have some kind of discussion with that, Karzai in Afghanistan?
Yeah, I don't know. I think though a couple of things. I mean, if you're asking about the possible influence that an American Muslim community could exercise in that particular incident.
No, I can't think that anything from the United States would be positive. I think it has to come from, Muslim communities and other,
Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, again, part of the problem here is that if we assume that the reason why this young man has found himself in this position is purely legal, then we could expect that people who could convince them that this legal opinion is simply wrong, flatly wrong, then we may hope that may do some good. But if the reason is really not legal, then all the legal vindications in the world are not necessarily going to help that situation. And I don't know.
My understanding was like he had violated Sharia law.
No, I understand that. I understand that. But what I'm saying is that may be the justification for something more overtly political. And if that's the case, no legal vindication, no legal explanation is going to change that. I don't know. I can say this. I don't know the particulars of the case. Prima facie, it sounds ridiculous to me. And I mean, as a scholar of Islamic law, I cannot imagine why somebody may receive a death sentence for downloading material that wow.
It's an honor.
Be nice.
To have you here. I actually
it's coming with the honor and the pleasure.
I mean it though. I wanted you to talk a little bit more about man-made versus God-made laws, because my understanding is that everything that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala understands what was intended by the revelation, and that our interpretation is based on or is dependent on the human medium, which of course we know is not infallible. So if you could sort of explore, expand on that a little bit.
Yeah.
And then I want you to try to apply that to, it's a very controversial issue, but I want to bring it up anyway.
But don't ask me that.
And I don't want you to assume that I have that opinion, but Amina Wajid Nasser, for example, came out and said that a woman can lead the prayer of men, and many of the scholars came out and said, well, no, she can't, because this is a matter of worship and it's closed. You cannot open that door. There's no question about it. So if you could relate sort of your discussion and then apply to that example, because would that be considered God-made laws that we cannot trespass, that we cannot question? Or
No.
is this, okay.
No. Look, I think that what we have to distinguish between, and you asked the question, man, so, I mean, if I get a little bit technical here, I apologize, but, and I hope I can stay simple. We have to distinguish between primary religious authority and secondary interpretive authority. And of course, the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet are the primary religious authorities for Muslims. You're right, however, the Quran and the Sunnah cannot interpret themselves. The Quran doesn't jump out at you and say, I mean this. Alright? And so Muslims have to interpret the Quran. And there's a whole tradition of interpretive methodology and a whole universe that has been established of sort of boundaries of communal interpretation. And whereas we tend to, look upon this with a lot of suspicion, all right? Because, religious communities are notorious for being, fideistic and just very closed to interpretation. Let me give you an example of just how vast the differences in interpretation can be. There was a classical scholar who wrote a book. He died in the year 318 of the Muslim calendar. He wrote a book entitled The Book of Unanimous Consensus. And this was a book in which, this was a major scholar, Ibn al-Munzir. He actually had a school of law of his own. That's how big he was. He cataloged all of the issues on which there was unanimous consensus among the jurists of his day. The Saudis published this book in the 1970s. It came out to be about 140 pages. A contemporary of his, the famous Al-Tabari, who died in 310, so he's contemporary. He wrote another book, The Book of Disagreement. And this book cataloged all of the issues on which the jurists of the day disagreed. 3,000 pages in manuscript. So this is actual reality, all right? And so the idea of variant understandings, interpretations here and there, Islam didn't have a problem with that. In fact, what it had, Sunni I'm talking about, in fact, what it had a problem with is any one individual claiming the authority to impose their interpretation on the community. It did not accept that, all right? So what I'm talking about in terms of man-made law, obviously all interpretations are mediated through secular history. We are ensconced in time and space, all right? That in and of itself, to me, does not necessarily make it man-made law. What I was talking about is the fact, however, that the Quran may give indications, for example, let's say, just general indications. Yeah, it's probably a good idea not to have people driving around in a way that kills each other. All right? But it gives no directives or injunctions in terms of how this should be regulated. None at all. We simply have to come up with a way of regulating that. So for example, if I were to tell you, look, I don't have to have a driver's license. There's nothing in the Quran, nothing in the Sunnah that would ever bind me to have a driver's license. All right? And if I were to challenge you to produce proof that I do, you have a very difficult time doing that. All right? By man-made, I'm simply talking about the fact that this is recognized as a broader interest. All right? That scripture may allude to, but does not address. And we have to come up with ways of addressing it. That's what I'm talking about. They always recognize this. All right? And by the way, in my talk, I was not implying that American law may not be, it may be a violation of God's law. It may be, in concrete terms. My point was simply that the whole idea of anything man-made at all is a violation of God's law. That's problematic. Now, with regard to Professor Wadud's statement on women leading the prayer, see, here I'm a hopeless pluralist, personally. And I don't mean that as a cop-out. I don't mean that I'm a pluralist because I have to allow every opinion because I really don't know what I think. Right? Or I don't believe in absolute truth. I do believe in absolute truth. Absolute truth exists. And I know what it is. I also know, though, that I might not be able to convince you of what it is. In the absence of some kind of additional authority that I don't have, I can't impose that upon you. The problem I have with the way that Professor Wadud's opinion is talked about is that if people recognize, yes, this is an opinion that deserves recognition, then they're good. But if an opposing opinion, does everybody understand what I mean? Opinion emerges. These guys hate women. Do you understand the point that I'm making there? And I think that when we're talking about opinions at Islamic law, we have to recognize that we're talking about opinions at Islamic law. There may be many things that I want or or that I would like to see. All right? For me to be able to claim those as a basis for the way the community should structure its life, I then have to validate that at Islamic law. And I may or may not be able to do that. And if I'm not able to do that, then I cannot claim it in the name of Islamic law. Do you understand what I mean by that? And I think that rather than look at the conservative side of this, and there is a conservative side to it, what we should look at is the fact that, well, wait a minute, there's also a positive side. Because the very fact that I can claim whatever I want to claim as Islamic law also means you can't do the same thing. So it protects both of us. In other words, if Professor Wadud, and I'm not, this is not against Professor Wadud, don't anybody get any wrong ideas. But if she can claim an opinion, all right, that's okay with Osama bin Laden. Did you understand what I mean by that? I mean, so if we open up the door of just free whatever I think and the spirit of the times, etc., without some disciplined strictures that govern the whole enterprise of what can be legitimately sanctioned as Islamic law, then we're all in trouble.
What about the opposing opinion about this is a matter of worship and...
No.
Okay.
I mean, go to any local mosque and you'll see some people in there praying like this. You'll also see some people praying like this. You also see some people praying like this. You also see people praying the right way, like this. but clearly prayer is a matter of religious observance. And clearly all of these are matters of interpretation. I don't know what they don't say that religious observances are not open to interpretation. What they say is that you cannot do analogy in the area of religious observance. In other words, in terms of civil transactions, let's say if I owe you $100, all right, and I pay you $100, and I say, you know what, that was really nice of you. Here, here's 50 more. All right, that's a good deed. Did you follow what I mean by that? But I cannot say, well, God said pray 2 units for the morning prayer, but I think I'm going to pray 9. Because the more the better. I can't do that. Because the religious observances are not open to analogy. Analogy. Do you understand what I mean by that?
I actually don't think I follow you.
Okay. All right. Okay. How many units are there? You're giving a fifth lesson there. In other words, in religious observance, let's take Ramadan, for example.
Actually, you can pray extra.
Not as a canonical prayer. That's the point. Not as a canonical prayer.
Yes.
Okay, all right. I cannot pray 9 rak'ahs or 9 units for the morning prayer and consider myself doing a better job because the more the merrier. Okay? In the area of religious observances, I can analogize all over the place. I'm sorry, in the area of civil transactions, mu'amalat, I can analogize all over the place. That's what they say you cannot do in religious observances. Not that you cannot reason on them, or debate them, or have different opinions about them. Is that okay?
So, women getting Jumu'ah and then leaving.
You asking me?
I'm asking you.
We have a sidebar about it.
Dr. Jackson, my name is Peter. And on this matter of Sharia law, and I'm not conversant on that completely, but one of the things that I hear a lot in our discourse now in this country bothers me because of people taking solid positions on different things. That concerns me in the extent that we've seen, I come out of the heritage of the Reformation. My forefathers were Roman Catholics, I'm Lutheran, and we've had North and South fighting, we've had blacks and whites fighting. And one of the things that strikes me when I go to Washington and I see statues, and I see that statue of justice with the blindfold and this balance scale. And I think of the word united. There are a lot of things here that, especially after 9/11, that I think tend to really bring people to a focus with a lot of energy. And one of the things that concerns me about that is that this is the United States of America. Now, counties have different laws, cities have different laws, states have different laws. The Mormons have gone through a period where they've had problems with the law about multiple wives. But I think one of the things we have to be very careful of is in all of this, that if there, and again I have to defer to you about Sharia law, but if we have a statute law and we have Sharia law, and somehow there are certain people in this country who are going to have certain rights under Sharia law, I think that begins to tear at the fabric of what we talk about as the United States. I'm very concerned about that. And I wonder if you've got some thoughts about that, because I would like to see us stay the United States, and I would like to see a lot of the racial and ethnic and economic jealousies and positions of division put in proper perspective. And I think some of the things we've been talking about here tend to get us out of that perspective, if you have some thoughts.
Yeah, I do. We don't have very long, but let me see if I can say a few things that might hold some value and coherence, rather they are. I agree with the heartfelt commitment to maintaining and sustaining the unity of the Union, as it were. I do somewhat, however, beg to differ with that notion that unity necessarily entails uniformity. And I think that one of the major challenges, and as a civilization, we've gone through challenges before. I personally think that you know, Isaiah Berlin had a very insightful point to make about this. And one of the points that he made is that we tend to think that diversity and quote-unquote division is the root of schism, of civil strife, war, etc. In point of fact, however, it may be that it is not division, but it is the attempt to overcome division through a single solitary solution, all right, that really pits us at each other in ways that war and conflict are unavoidable. And what we may be looking at, and what may, and I want to say this openly. This is no more anyone else's country than it is mine. In point of fact, and I don't mean this directed to you personally here, but just to put this in perspective, my people were here before many other people in this room. So I don't want people to get this idea that, well, you know, how really committed are these people to the American project? I'm deeply committed to the American project. But I think that one of the things that the American project may be faced with is the fact that we will now have to learn how to deal with diversity, as opposed to trying to overcome diversity by a superimposed uniformity. And one of the contributions, if the Muslims ever get their act together, that Muslims may be able to make to this miraculous project, experiment, may be to make us a bit more comfortable with how we deal with diversity and difference. And so I'm not one of those who believes that the answer to our problems, or I should say our problems, the answer to our reality as Americans is simply to sort of to reduce everything to a bland gray. And I really do think that the real challenge for us, and I don't mean this simply in terms of slogans and even ideological statements. I mean a real moving of the furniture, whereby we actually come to see the solution in how I can accommodate difference, as opposed to seeing difference as a threat, as something that I must conquer and overcome. I think that we have to resist this urge. And this is why, young man here, this is why that kind of extremism is so offensive to me as a Muslim. Because it assumes almost divinity. No one has the right to impose their opinion on me in the absence of some kind of, you know, God-sanctioned authority. And his opinion is only an opinion, right? And so I think that that may be where we need to try and think about how we can go. I don't think that the 21st century will end as it started. I think that a commitment to a more genuine pluralism, and not simply a mass assimilationist program that parades as pluralism. I think that will be the challenge for the 21st century, to find a way to come to terms with that.
As you make that statement here at Stanford, the motto of the university is Die Luft der Freiheit weht, the winds of freedom blow.
Thank you.